Well, I'm Joe Blake, and I'm currently with Colorado State University as Chancellor Emeritus. I've been in this position for several years now. Prior to that, I was Chancellor at Colorado State University, and during the time that we are talking about here with regard to the Colorado Baseball Commission, I was with Mission Viejo Company at the time that it was developing and creating the Highlands Ranch community. So I was spending a lot of time in Douglas County and spending time on the external side of the equation with regard to the development of the community, even though I was continuing to live then and now at Park Hill. So I had a long commute going back and forth, but certainly Douglas County at the time was beginning to grow and showing the development that it has created since. Highlands Ranch today is about 100,000 people, and at the time it was just getting started. I had several conversations with Chris Paulson during the time that the concept was being developed by Kathy Williams, by all the people in the state legislature. It was the idea of creating the opportunity to bring Major League Baseball here to Colorado. Neil Macy was right in the middle of all those discussions as a business leader and as a community leader, bringing that together. Time passed, and a bill was introduced in the General Assembly to create as I recall, a Major League Metropolitan Stadium District Authority, which was coterminous with the Regional Transportation District, coterminous with the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, so that there was at the time, as I recall, 5 or 6 counties involved in that endeavor, not all of which were involved in, for example, Douglas County was not entirely within the SCFD, nor at the time within the SCFD or RTD. In any event, a measure was discussed and a measure was put forward to refer the matter to the voters in the district that had been created, to create a taxing district that would require the passage by voters, majority of voters in the district, to create a sales tax. As I remember, it was 2 cents on $10, something to that effect. But it was a referred measure, and I'll come back and say why that was why that was important, as opposed to an initiated measure. The matter was passed by the General Assembly, signed by Governor Romer, and referred to the people, and required a campaign to get started with that. I was appointed by Governor Romer with pretty much the expectation that Gary Antonoff, who was also on the Baseball Commission, and ironically a classmate of mine at East High School, we have known each other forever, and Gary and I were more or less charged with developing the resources and the infrastructure for the campaign to get that matter passed. It was an amazing undertaking because as a referred measure, there really was no organized citizen infrastructure put together. When you have an initiated measure, you have people who are engaged in getting petitions signed, and you have developed a political infrastructure that really is important. And in this case, there was none. It is difficult to imagine this idea, which today, of course, has been so successful and so universally applauded, that at the time there was not necessarily a universal idea that this was a good thing to do. You already had the Denver Bears were playing, then called Denver Zephyrs, who were playing at Old Mile High, that had been created in such a way that the stadium could be turned into a ballpark and the outfield could be moved outside. So there were people who said, why do we need to even have a ballpark? That isn't such a great idea. We don't think that's important. We don't want that kind of a tax. We already can do it. And why doesn't Major League just come here and make it happen here? Why do we have to move ahead with finding this? Nonetheless, Gary and I then started working with Rick Ryder, who was selected to be the campaign manager, and began for me the creation of a lifelong friendship with Rick Ryder. I subsequently have done a number of issue campaigns with him and find him a remarkable mind, a remarkable person, and someone who really was forward thinking in the way in which this needed to be put together. So the campaign was created, but we lacked a lot of things. We lacked primarily resources. And we lacked, as I said, the infrastructure that you need in the counties in which this vote was going to take place. Rick came up with an idea that was, I think, remarkable in terms of having moms go out with ironing boards to Little League games and others to get people to sign up. It had no force of law, but getting them to sign up to show their support for Major League Baseball. So he would have these moms go out to various ballparks where kids were playing to show a great deal of enthusiasm for that. Other than the fact that we got, as I recall, a $50,000 check to the initial effort to start raising money for this from the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce. I remember going down, and Tom Clark was very much involved in getting that $50,000. We were very excited to get that going. But now, what are you going to do for the next effort to try to make this work? We set about, particularly Gary, who is a lifelong friend. We became lifelong friends. We already had known each other at East High. But because of the work that we had to put together, we met every Friday morning with Rick at old Racine's, and we would go through what the week is going to look like, who is going to talk to who is going to talk to whom, and figure out what kind of money we could start to raise. I know one of the things that came about was the fact that we thought at that point in Chicago, old Comiskey Field was being torn down, and across the way, adjacent to it, in the old parking lot, new Comiskey was going to be put together. So Rick and others came up with the idea we ought to charter a plane, and we ought to charge everybody, as I remember, $1,000 to get on that plane and fly to Chicago, see how that ballpark was coming together, and then go catch a game at Wrigley Field, a Cubs game, which we did. It's funny how you remember these things, because flying in this chartered flight with Gary, we're flying over Iowa, and Gary said, you know, I was originally born in Iowa, moved to Denver, and we were looking down on his old hometown of Struble, Iowa, as I recall. But it was fantastic. Got to Chicago, went to Comiskey Field. It was my first experience of being in Chicago and seeing that under construction. It was fantastic. And then we went over to Wrigley. Harry Carey was in the box and was singing and carrying on. We all had fun. And then after the game, we all went to Harry Carey's bar in Chicago, and I have a memory of leading us with Harry Carey, and together he and I leading us in the old take us out to the ball game. And then we got back on the plane and came to Denver. But I think we raised something in the neighborhood of $40,000 or $50,000 in that endeavor. Nonetheless, we had to keep going to try to raise the money. In the meantime, the commission is meeting with, I think, monthly meetings, as I recall, maybe more frequently, but as I remember, something like that. Larry Varnell was a co-chair, Sam Simplizio co-chair. They were great co-chairs. And when you look at the commission itself, I think the makeup of the commission reflected very well on the governor and the governor's ability to pull together a pretty broadly based group geographically and as far as their interests in baseball were concerned. It was a fascinating and well-balanced group. What we lacked in infrastructure, however, as far as the civic side or the ability to have a political organization, what we lacked there, we made up with what I would say was free advertising. Free because the sports figures on the media, on the radio, television, and certainly on the newspaper side, all covered those commission meetings very carefully. Bob Howsam Sr. Was a remarkable counselor to us as we went through. His experience with the Cincinnati Reds was extraordinary, and his son Robert Howsam Jr. were major parts of the council that went into what are we trying to structure here? What are we trying to put together? A matter of trivia, if I'm not mistaken, I think Bob Howsam Sr. was the son-in-law of former United States Senator and former Governor Ed Johnson, and so Howsam was just this gentleman, this person who provided great counsel and understanding. You also had, coming into that, Irv Brown was, of course, member of the commission. He was very thoughtful in everything that he was putting together for the newspaper as he was covering this. And then you had the ability of Roger Kenney, who had been so active, as I remember. He chaired the Denver Baseball Commission when it was being looked at by Federico Pena and others on a prior effort to attract Major League Baseball. But Roger was a very solid advisor to our group. In the meantime, however, Gary and I are working to try to raise the money to make this all come about and get ready for the election. We had high hopes that this would make an impact for Major League Baseball, and that the Denver Bears, Denver Zephyrs at the time might come in with a nice check for us. John DeCue, as I remember, came in with a check for about $25,000, maybe $10,000, which was a significant help for us at the time. But the major aspect of this that never can be overlooked is the fact that as we were going along, and it was apparent that we needed more resources than we were going to be able to get. One day at the campaign office, unsolicited, we get a letter and with a check for $100,000, which came from Bill Daniels, just trying to help us move along in a way that there's no possibility today to understand the excitement we had, the recommitment we had for Bill Daniels and his contribution to Major League Baseball. We never can overlook that gift that he made at a crucial time. In the meantime, many of us on the commission, certainly Gary, myself, Rick Ryder, we had worked up an arrangement with Imperial hats that we had these baseball caps made up that Imperial really helped us. I believe they donated those to us, and we would sell those for $100 a piece. Well, you could go through a lot of speeches and a lot of meetings and come away with $500 or $600 or $700 or $800 at the end of it, but incrementally you're just in constant need of trying to raise more money. But it was remarkable to see how Gary and Rick and I worked together in those meetings at Old Racine's, because we would pull out the list. We would say who's going to talk to who and who has talked to who based on what happened last week. As a result, the accountability, the commitment, the ability for us to move in all the directions that we were able to do was really a testimony to the trust that the three of us had developed in trying to put this campaign together. I know Z Ferrafino, who was also on the commission, was extraordinarily helpful with the Hispanic community. Z was constantly trying to figure out ways to bring in more interest and support from the Hispanic community, and he did a fabulous job. I remember on that trip we made to Chicago on the chartered flight, there were a couple of young men who were just excited to be part of this. They had heard about this chartered flight on the radio, and they came, and on this flight we formed a great friendship. They got involved in the campaign, and my admonition to them on the plane and every day for the campaign thereafter was, you've got to do something outrageous today for baseball. What outrageous thing have you done? What have you tried to create in terms of a sense of excitement, a sense that this is really going to make a difference in what's going to happen? As you know, at the time, there was not a site that had been selected. That question came about much later in the campaign. But there were interests in Douglas County for having a ballpark out there. There was certainly a lot of interest there was a great deal of interest in the suburban communities for baseball, as well as in Denver itself. One of the things that we tend to overlook is that as this ballot measure was going on, at the same time in Denver, there was a ballot measure to raise additional funds, I believe through a mill levy, for the expansion of the Denver library system. So there was more than just one ballot measure that November when we got ready for that vote. But it began to coalesce. It began to coalesce. You could begin to sense the fact, and I think the Denver media was very helpful in getting that word out, getting the sense of excitement, the sense of we need to make this we need to make this happen in Denver. It was interesting. I'm a Denver native and grew up here, and I think one of the great aspects about Denver and about this region is that the natives are in the minority here, and that's a good thing, because sometimes we overlook the fact that people have moved here and they're excited to be here. They love being in Colorado, and they remember their experiences elsewhere. I remember in these discussions as we would go around in various, whether it was a Rotary Club or whether it was Lions or any other organization, it was fascinating to have men and women say, hey, when I was a girl, I remember being in Chicago and going to ball games with my dad. I sure hope we can have the same experience here that I had, whether that was Chicago or New York or Atlanta. And so a lot of people wanted this to happen. And some of the people, there was a newspaper man at the time at the Rocky Mountain News, Gene Amel, didn't necessarily think this was the greatest idea. We already had, as I had mentioned earlier, we already had a stadium at Mile High that could be expanded to accommodate baseball. Why do you need to do this? People won't sustain it. People won't come out. You don't have a market broad enough, deep enough to be able to deal with this. In the meantime, discussions are going on with the commission and others to help design the ballpark. What is it going to need? You're going to need that intimate experience. You can't have 80,000 people watching a ball game, although opening day here we did eventually have about 80,000 people watching that first game. But Bob Howsam and others kept us focused on on the experience of baseball, what it really needs, the intimacy, the ability to have a sense of place that would make the difference. And so people got engaged in what it would look like. What's this ballpark going to be? Now this is beginning to take a sense of excitement. I remember the National League. Remember, we needed to have, we were an expansion team. This was a big deal. This was an expansion team. Window of opportunity had opened up. As I remember, Miami was looking, and I think Miami came in at the same time we came in. So the National League was going to come out here. They didn't want a lot of publicity. They wanted to just, we want to just kind of look and see what you're doing. Well, the commission, the community, the individuals, they couldn't stand by and just watch the commissioner for the National League come in here. We ended up having a major celebration, a major recognition to show that the community really strongly supported, over and above the pending vote that was going to take place. So the community really started to come together. I said before, say again, Woody Page was very much involved in this discussion, showing a lot of enthusiasm. And we got, for no investment, the kind of media attention that really was positive. There was a positive from the sports side, and Talk Sport Radio was very much involved in making all of this come true. The election takes place. It's fascinating how these various communities came or did not come together. I mentioned at the outside, and then we'll settle down here. But I mentioned at the outside that the Major League Metropolitan Baseball District was coterminous with the RTD District and with the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. The idea for a sales tax was the same as had been used for SCFD and the RTD. So you had Adams, Arapahoe, Douglas, Jefferson County, and Denver at the time that were involved in this, as well as Boulder. So you had the 6 counties, portions of which were in, some of which were out. Interestingly enough, this is my recollection, and I haven't looked at it for 20 plus years, but Douglas County, not very well populated at the time. They might have had 50,000 at the most at that time, maybe not that many. Total population of Douglas. But Douglas County overwhelmingly in favor of this, even though no one knew where the ballpark was going to go. Arapahoe, overwhelmingly in favor of this. Jeffco, overwhelmingly in favor. Adams, not so much. I don't know that it passed in Adams. Boulder was, I don't think it passed in Boulder, or if it did, it was by a very narrow margin. And my recollection is that I don't think Denver, if it passed it by a very few votes. But my recollection is that it was not favorably seen in Denver, even though Denver is considered a rather liberal community as far as taxes are concerned. But you owed it to the various counties that ended up, of course, not having a ballpark, not having that revenue coming in and out, passing that, and we owe it to that. And one of the things that the commission did a very good job in making sure that you had representatives on the commission. Chris Christensen was a county commissioner from Douglas County, an enthusiastic member of the commission, and you wanted to be sure that those counties were honored in the way in which it came together. One of the things that is unique about this region over time, and it is, I think, without parallel in the country, in terms of metropolitan areas or anywhere, is the fact that we have a lot of metropolitan cooperation here. And that has been done through economic development on the private side, whether that was being accomplished with the metropolitan districts, but it showed our ability to work together. Not to be invidious, but I know in St. Louis they have so many little communities, each of which is afraid that someone else's gain will be their loss, that they don't work together the way we work together here. And the concept of a multi-jurisdictional taxing district is just remarkable. It was remarkable when it was created. SCFD, as everyone knows, is a marvel. It's one of the best things that's ever happened to this community, and it's been reauthorized 3 times now because people see how it works. Finally, when the site was selected, it is remarkable to reflect. You still had viaducts in downtown. You still had a downtown that had very minimal 24-hour living going on. A few people resided downtown. In one of my 400 lives, I was with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development here in the regional office of HUD at the time that we were completing the Skyline Urban Renewal Project. What housing was down there, other than Brooks Towers and a few others, was mostly subsidized housing, FHA subsidized multifamily housing that had gone on. And lots of money had been spent for TIF financing to get urban renewal going. And yet it hadn't taken. That investment was still very slow. Dana Crawford had done a phenomenal job of preserving and creating a sense of excitement with Larimer Square. But by and large, the downtown was not a very livable place for 24 hours. It was not. It just didn't work that way. And then here comes the idea of a ballpark. And the ballpark, the location of it was stunning when you step back and think about it. I know when they first said, "Hey, we're gonna put this ballpark in the downtown Denver on Blake Street," I thought, what in the world are they going to do with parking? Parking will be an issue. No, it's remarkable how parking has not been an issue, and that people are using public transportation to get back and forth. Yes, their parking spaces have been made available, but unlike, for example, DIA, you're not constantly adding parking to try to deal with what's going on at the ballpark. I realize there's a finite number that can attend a game. No other ballpark and no other major league team will ever exceed our first and second and third year in attendance. I mean, it set records that will, in the millions, that will never be eclipsed because of the enthusiastic support, whether that came from Wyoming or whether that came from southern Colorado or whether that came from the western slope, and certainly from the community here. But it was a remarkable undertaking, took a lot of effort on the part of Representative Williams, Representative Paulson, and a lot of courage to get this idea moving. Give Governor Romer great credit for selecting a group of very committed people to serve on that commission, and the outcome has been highly beneficial for Colorado. We're all very proud to have been a part of it.
So you were so involved in the election campaign. How did you feel on election night?
Well, we were just ecstatic on election night when it came about, but it was fascinating to see where the support had come from. Again, Arapahoe, Jeffco. Yes, we were very enthusiastic about, because I was so involved with Highlands Ranch at the time, very enthusiastic about the response from Douglas County, but obviously puzzled about Denver. Now again, Denver had on the ballot at the same time the increase in a modest increase in taxes to expand the library, which it passed, and appropriately so.
So, Joy, not to underestimate the job that you and Gary had. At the same time, we were in a recession at that time. And trying to pass any tax issue in general was a heavy, heavy lift. And by virtue, as you say, that there was another tax issue on the ballot, certainly made it hard to raise money, but also knowing that we probably were losing our potential owner in John DeCue. And not having any money to run TV ads, when you look at how elections are run today,
right.
I mean, this is an incredible thing. I think the thing that we haven't mentioned so far is that we had it originally scheduled for the November ballot. And because of a change in Major League Baseball schedule, that they'd be meeting before November, we had to move the election up to August.
That's right.
Do you want to talk about that?
No, that's a good point. Thank you. We did move it up to August in order to signal our willingness and our ability to take on Major League Baseball here. That was a very important piece of this, because Major League Baseball, the National League, was looking for what kind of commitment do you all want? This is just not another civic good thing to have. What is your commitment? One of the things that it is somewhat on point of your question, I think on a larger scale, though, it's important to point this out, because in most areas, the representative body can raise taxes without a vote of the people. Here in Colorado, all taxing districts, the voters in those taxing districts, whether that's a library district or whether that's a metropolitan district to construct projects, or a water and sanitation district, or a school district or state, under Tabor, we have to have a vote of the people. I personally support this. I think it's a very important thing that taxpayers need to vote on those tax increases. And what does that require? That requires, in my opinion, because that always generates a campaign, and that always creates the need for money to fund a campaign. And who funds those campaigns? It is by and large the business community, and you have got to have the support of the business community in order to get these items passed. And the business community, by and large, will do a very good job of examining the concepts, of examining the viability of such a project, because they're going to end up paying for it. We forget, certainly on property taxes, that because of the Gallagher Amendment, the homeowner, the non-commercial, pays a fraction of what the commercial, and that is business community, pays on commercial taxes when every time there's a ad valorem tax increase. So to your point about this was being done in a difficult time, but the business community, Denver Metro Chamber, saw, and others did as well, all these chambers supported it. Businesses supported this. Now, did that mean they wrote a check for it? No, not necessarily. We had to go out and try to keep working on them to do it. But I think the community looks to the business community for on major projects. Denver International Airport required a vote. It looks to the business community to say, what are we doing here? You know, in those days, you had about the same time this is going on, we had about $10 billion of projects approved. That included the University of Colorado with some of the projects that they had, certificates of participation and others. DIA was part of that. I mean, we should be a very proud community for the investment we made, and certainly the National League and others when they looked at, can Denver support this? They looked and saw that the community voted to tax itself on a modest amount. I mean, this was not, in fact, take it a step further. The economy recovered so well that, as I remember, when you established the bill, it was a 15-year period to repay those bonds. So it was 20 years. 20, you paid them off in 15 years or less. 10 years, okay, because the economy recovered so fast. And then the idea was, okay, if we did that, you'll remember, then the idea was, let's go back to the legislature and see if we can redirect that metropolitan baseball district and allow the football side to do the same thing, to redirect that money, but take another reauthorization. There was another campaign. Rick Ryder was involved to a large extent in that subsequent campaign, and others, to redirect after the bonds had been paid off. It's a remarkable story, and we had faith in ourselves that we could do it, and we did it. And then we redirected those funds to now the current unnamed Mile High stadium today.
So after the election, were you involved in any of the promotions or ownership meetings or any of that?
This is Neil, one of the great aspects I want to go back to the commission, because the commission had gifts. The individuals had great gifts. Trig Mirren, for example, who was a classmate of mine at Dartmouth, and just a great friend today. He and Vicki are just fabulous friends. Trig and others then got involved in the very difficult job. Okay, who's going to be the owner of this, or owners, plural, of this? And a great deal of discussion, taking and using the gifts that these people had in terms of talent, was redirected and trying to find a solid, and it took a little effort. I mean, there were a couple of steps and missteps. We're delighted with the ultimate ownership of the team. I mean, it's come out beautifully, and the sense that we have now is that it really was and worked out well. But initially, you'll remember that there were some misfires. Governor Romer was very much involved. As Governor Romer was an irrepressible enthusiast for not just baseball, but for anything that could provide additional vibrancy for the community, and Denver International Airport is certainly one of those.
Right. So do you have any final thoughts of the entire process?
Well, I think the entire process, you could almost look at it as a case study in the process, the political process and the civic and process of taking a concept. We want to have Major League Baseball here, which had been talked about forever. As a young boy, well, very young boy, Merchants Park was still, when I was a boy, was a ballpark out on South Broadway. And you would have some Major League players come out, play here. Bob Feller, I remember, and others were here. And so the idea of having baseball, Major League Baseball, was really important. Early on, this was a great baseball community. Whether we had the best AAA organization in the country, and we always did with the Denver Bears. There was an enormous following of having baseball here in Colorado. But Major League took a major step to get it to happen. The Denver Baseball Commission was established, lots of excitement, but it just didn't quite get over the hump that it needed to have because it didn't have quite the broad base that it needed. It had great leadership. I mentioned Roger Kenney. I mean, my gracious, he was a phenomenal person and is today. But here was an idea that emanated in the legislature, had leadership. You were certainly a part of that, Neil, in terms of we have to have, let's see what we can do to get this to move forward. You had organizations like the Denver Metro Chamber and others who for years had wanted to have that happen. But the dynamics of getting it to happen were remarkable. Let's remember that we had a window, and the window was the National League is going to expand. So we've got to be one of the two teams that we think is going to make this happen. So it was not just a rocket shot to try to hit the moon. It was the moon is coming into the right orbit. We need to be there, and we need to bring all of these resources together to make it happen, and that's what happened.
Well, I know, Joe, that both Neil and I feel that this is very much just as you have said, you know, whether it's the stars are aligned and, you know, we've got to put in the work. But we, I think, very much agree with you on this gifts piece, that this was a relay race. If anyone would have dropped the baton,
That's right.
it would have been over.
That's right. That is absolutely right. You look at that commission, and I hope in the biography that you're putting together, you will highlight the individuals because each of them had these gifts. I mentioned Z. Ferrafino. Z was remarkable in reaching out and engaging the Hispanic community in this, and remained that way. Everybody, I mean, everyone, they came to this for the right reasons, and we had great leadership in terms of Sam Simplicio and Larry Varnell. Gosh, I can still remember Sam Simplicio at a Rotary meeting when he was there one time at Denver Rotary and saying, gosh, someday we could even be in the World Series, you know, and there we were in the World Series. Not for long, but there we were.
Well, who knows?
We're coming this time.
Yeah,
This is the
a
year.
good year.
Go
for
Arenado.
sure.
Well, that's really great, Joe. Thank you very much.
It's certainly one of the best interviews we've had, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for getting the water.
Well,